Okay, I guess we're ready to start. Thank you so much once again for joining us today. Thank you for coming to panel 5B, Oral Traditions and Ethnography. I'm very excited to be chairing this panel because the range of presentations today, from Punjabi Kisse to Begumati Zuban to marriages and the culture of Kaap, we have a lot to talk about in terms of women's language and what that means and how language can be gendered and how that is performed. So I'm really excited for this. My name is Sheila. I haven't been introducing myself the past 2 days, so I figured might as well do it in the last day. I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, and I will be chairing this panel today. Let me quickly go over the order of presentations. We have Lubna Awan, then we have Jemima Nasrin, Lubna Ansari, and then Saneya. Saneya doesn't wish to be recorded. And Lubna Ansari's paper, there's a portion at the end, which we will not be recording. So we will stop the recording before that. There was a content warning for Lubna Ansari's paper, but it's no longer there. So we don't have to worry about that. And yeah, I guess without any further ado, let's begin. At any point, if any of you have questions, please leave them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll take them at the end. All speakers today get a 15-minute time limit. But again, if you want to go over a minute or two, I think it's fine, just because we can remove the break that we've sort of planned. But I do wish that we get a bit more time for the Q&A. So please do try and keep your time limit. Firstly, we have Lubna Awan, who's a master's student at SOAS. Let me quickly read out. Lubna Awan is a strange outcome of a Pakistani father and Algerian mother. She's pursuing a master's in law at SOAS University of London, where she is currently working on a dissertation which attempts at decolonizing and demystifying Islamic law through the poetic works on the self by Muhammad Iqbal. Welcome, Lubna, whenever you're ready. And if you have issues sharing, let me know and I can help you.
Thank you. I'm audible, yes? Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Please forgive me. This is like this is the first attempt at going at Muslim philosophy. So, and please correct me if I've gone wrong in any way. So I'm going to read off the page because I'm very nervous. So the topic is Wahdat al-Wujud, the ontology of masculine and feminine in Punjabi Qisse as read through the lens of Ibn Arabi. So Islamic mystical poetry has a complex history, starting off as simplistic ascetic songs in the Arab Peninsula and following a multifaceted journey of eternal love between man and God as it traveled through Persia, present-day Afghanistan, and came into contact with the vernaculars of India. One genre of such poetry took the form of the qissa story, used in the early Islamic era to impart religious lessons. The romance tradition of the qissa developed as this genre proliferated through Persian literature, finding a permanent home in the region of the Punjab. The scholarship emergent on Punjabi qisse has followed several trajectories, predominant amongst them the devotional aspect of the qissa. Such scholarship has tended to oversimplify the allegorical meaning of these epics, by which the tragic heroine of the qissa is viewed as a metaphor for the Sufi saint loving and sacrificing himself to reach union with the hero protagonist, represented as the god figure. A unique reading of Waris Shah's rendition of the epic Hiranja through the lens of the abstract concept of Wahdat al-Wujud, the oneness of being, or to Muhyiddin al-Arabi, has led me to believe that that rather than portraying this limited view, the devotional aspect of these qissas speak to a more earthly love, which not only required worldly consummation to attain divine status, but also essentialized the feminine as an equal and necessary part of spiritual transcendence. Sufi poetry has not always enjoyed an easy relationship with the beliefs of Muslim orthodoxy. However, ascetic verses began to emerge as early as the 7th century, giving way to love poetry, which cultivated a personal relationship between creator and created. In the 10th century, the execution of Hussein ibn Mansur Hallaj for heresy led to the proliferation of his ideas across the Muslim world, which denoted that the uncovering of the mystery of creation could be achieved by annihilating the self in God, fana fillah, through assiduous asceticism, creating a unique moment in which the divine spirit revealed itself to the ascetic lover. Such thought came to be repeated in the mystical poetry of Persian thought, determining love to be the most intrinsic principle of divine life and lending itself to tales of erotic love as depicted through the epic of Khusro Shirin and retelling of Layla Majnun. By the mid-14th century, Sufi poetry had penetrated the subcontinent and popular local tales were transformed into mediums of mystical teaching. Punjabi qisse lay at the nexus of Perso-Islamic and Punjabi literary forms, drawing heavily from the format of the Persian language, whilst imbibing the local flavor of regional tradition. Predominant scholarship has maintained that the central devotional theme in popular Punjabi qisse, such as Heer Ranja, Sassi Punnu, and Soni Mahiwal, is of the heroine pining for her male consort, ripped away from her by extrinsic forces, and assiduously searching for him until a tragic death renders her soul immortal and capable of reunification with the hero, represented as the allegorical god figure. Reading of these qisse in such a manner seems to have imbibed a Hallajian method by which a deeper love between feminine and masculine is only understood in terms of a vertical relationship. There is no doubt that the vertical love of God was prominent in the poetry of Punjabi Sufi saints such as Shah Hussain, who wrote the lines, Rabba mere hal da mehram tu, andar tu hi bahir tu hi tana, tu hi bana, sab kuch mera tu, kahe Hussain fakir sainda, main nahi sab tu, which translates into, O God, you are aware of my pitiable condition. You are inside as well as outside. You reside in the pores of my body. You are the warp and the weft. You are all in all for me. The mendicant of God says, not I, but you are everything. However, such verses invoke God directly in their devotion. The pain of separation from the divine is obvious, even if the language being used is allegorical. In another poem, however, Hussain retells of the story of Heer and Ranja through a very different metaphorical expression in the verses, Mahi Mahi kardi ve main aape Ranja hoy. Ranja, Ranja, mainu sab koi aakho, Heer na aakho koi. While repeating the name of my lover, I myself have become Ranja. All of you call me Ranja, no one should call me Heer. Such verses have been understood to depict a form of devotion by which a deity's name is repeated over and over, as seen in the Birha tradition, to reach a trance-like state of fana. Other poet saints who delivered verse in these two separate forms have also been read in a similar manner. In all such readings, the devotional aspect of the poetry were analyzed to formulate the heroine into the submissive, seeking the godlike male. Critics have claimed that love epics were employed by Sufi poets to mask the pursuit of fana, to avoid the wrath of the orthodoxy as suffered by Hallaj and others like him. The fact, however, that the same poets employed devotional poetry claiming the principles of fana, whilst also valorizing immortal human love as a devotional practice, makes the argument a weak one. To understand then what the devotional elements of the Punjabi qisse allegorize, it is important that other schools of thought be consulted, and in my opinion, the concept of wahdatul wujud may aptly be employed to gain a better understanding of these qisse. Ibn al-Arabi, father of this thought, cuts a controversial figure in Islamic critical thinking, not only amongst the orthodoxy, but also amongst Sufi circles themselves. Ibn al-Arabi's mysticism, although remaining true to the conventional Sufi thought that the ultimate goal of human life is to attain union with the absolute, departs heavily from Hallaj's voluntaristic ideas of annihilating oneself in God, approaching spirituality through a theosophical or Gnostic method to lift the veil of ignorance that shrouds the personal love between human and God. Ibn al-Arabi viewed God and man as essentially one, with God being both spirit and form, together forming the combined essence. Ibn al-Arabi in his works equates divine essence with dynamic love and defines this love as a movement that separates and unites, which he believes is the Sir al-Akhlaq, the secret of creation. The movement to Ibn al-Arabi is one by which the world came into existence, and the only way this earthly realm could take concrete form, and dictated that this movement be a movement of love. Ibn Arabi delineates three aspects of love which separately and together constitute the same reality. Divine love, which is existent reciprocally between human and God; spiritual love, through which the human lover transcends his physicality to become at one with his beloved and returns to the essence; and natural love, which exists between commoners, the male and the female, the consummation of which, spiritual and physical, leads back to the essence. Mainly ignored, even by vehement followers of Ibn Arabi, is how he describes this movement to be manifest in the creation of Adam and Eve. In the visible world, according to him, the ontological Adam is conceived in the image of the Absolute in his singleness. But it was when the Absolute desired to be mirrored in concrete form that he extracted Eve, the female element, from within Adam. Adam's love for Eve, hence, is a love for his most inward self, whereas Eve's love for Adam is a love for her origin. The Absolute's love, then, is his love for Adam manifested through both male and female, and their love for him is a yearning for the essence from which they emerged. Viewed through this lens, the protagonists of the Punjabi qisse take on the hue of Adam and Eve, both desperate in a love that belongs both to an essentialism of union with their origins and a predestination outside their control. In Waris Shah's Heer, for example, Ranja, after being separated from Heer, approaches Jogi Balnath and asks to become a Jogi, but refuses to lead an ascetic's life as advised by the Jogi, and asks that Heer be granted him instead. The Jogi, who is sat in prayer, responds, "Go, son, your wish is granted. The true Almighty has granted Heer to you." This again connects back to Ibn Arabi's idea that as the visible world is connected through a system of mirrors, and the feminine acts as a mirror for the image of God, attaining Heer for Ranja is the equivalent of attaining the Almighty. These couplets also reveal a divine communication whereby God himself blesses a union of true lovers who are predestined to find him through each other. It is in the same manner that Waris Shah in this epic equates Heer's love for Ranja as something predestined through the verse, "So it is willed by fate indeed. None can undo what fate ordains. For I got my Ranja from the court of heaven. God himself made me a gift of him." Such verses depict what Ibn Arabi would describe as love becoming a journey to return to one's inwardness. It was his belief that it was only the Prophet and a few chosen by God who are able to reach truth through personal strife and bring down the veil between man and essence. And hence it was only through this synthesis of spiritual and natural love that a commoner may reach the essence. Ibn Arabi's thought alludes to the idea that true lovers, through the manifestation of their spiritual and physical love for each other, are able to unveil the truth. Here, in response to the Qadi, judge, who threatens her with the loss of her life if she does not renounce Ranja and marry a man of her parents' choosing, responds that, "To live is good, Sir Qadi, but if only one lives in truth." Such awareness emanated from a woman of little learnedness may, as seen through the thought of Ibn Arabi, only mean that she had attained the meaning of truth through her physical and spiritual union with her lover. It is also the aspect of physical union in these qisse that makes it harder to buy into the idea that Sufi poets engaging with this material were necessarily looking at the relationship between the female and male protagonist as a vertical one. Traditionally, the ascetic who aimed at achieving union with God through assiduous love renounced worldly pleasures, as was the case with Bulleh Shah, who refused the company of women so as not to be distracted from his pursuit of union. The epic of Waris Shah's Heer is in fact rife with sensuality, and at many points in the epic, it is obvious that the love between the protagonists is consummated. Such telling of the relationship between the lovers connects back to Ibn Arabi's idea that it was only through the symbiosis of spiritual and physical love that the absolute may be attained. He creates a link between the ascetic discipline of spiritual love, which makes lovers able to enter the realm of imagination, transcending their physical forms, and uniting physically through the physical and the spiritual. It is through this transcendence that the male and female are able to reproduce the primordial act of creation. The spiritual aspect of this love is achieved through the pursuit of knowing one's inward self, which again, to Ibn Arabi comes through the experience of the other as a mirror in which the absolute is reflected. The last and perhaps most important point in using the work of Ibn Arabi to decipher the devotional meaning of the Punjabi qisse is the element of seeking that these qisse are loaded with. Sassi traverses the desert to search for Punnu. Soni swims across the river to visit Mahiwal every night, and Ranja suffers the poverty of an ascetic in the quest for heat. According to Ibn Arabi, God's love to be known as revealed in the Quran led to a self-disclosure through the process of creation, which dichotomously resulted in a separation and dispersion from the one. This separation, hence, creates within man the constant yearning for reunion, and love becomes the means of striving on the spiritual path for return to one's ontological source. Since the male and female are linked ontologically, the separation and yearning for reunification between the lovers in Punjabi epics is an allegory for the seeking that one lover must do for the knowledge of the other to know one's inner self. It is only through this knowledge of the inner self that one may return to the essence, and it is unlikely that such knowledge should come with ease. Tales and legends, especially those of a romantic hue, form some of the richest of the oral and literary traditions everywhere, since most have a common source and universal appeal. Some such tales encompass within them such evocative emotion of tragedy and intensity that human language is only able to capture them by associating them with something supernatural. One of the myths of creation, even in Greek lore, iterates that humankind was at first created as two souls in a singular body, separated by a vengeful Zeus, resulting in the human quest being an eternal one for its soulmate. Here, an argument with the Qadi, who is to marry her off to someone other than Ranja, claims similarly of her soul being attached to that of Ranja's. Punjabi qisse, evocative and heart-wrenching, speak of a love between two people so deep that it is impossible not to associate them with divinity. The problem with the existing scholarship on the qisse, however, is that they take away the agency of the female protagonist by putting her in a vertical relationship with the male, rendering her a prop in the story rather than an active participant. Ibn al-Arabi, an esoteric thinker, I believe, not only returns the woman's agency to her, but also allows for common people to achieve spirituality outside the limitedness of the dargah. In removing it from the lower echelons of Islamic thought, where it is considered something base and crass, Ibn al-Arabi returns sexual love to its natural place, locating it in the heart of the divine. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Lubna. That was truly delving into something that we often don't really consider is, not only what love could mean and its many iterations, but also the hierarchies of love. And something that you really spoke about, the difference between this vertical love and what Ibn Arabi was sort of restoring to women. And obviously through this classic juxtaposition of Hiranja and Adam and Eve, it's quite interesting to see how this is all sort of spiritualized. And in that spiritualization, there is this embedded hierarchy. And thus that becomes preached and sung and believed and worshipped. And there is an inherent issue with the way that we understand this love as not being amongst equals. We'll chat later. Thank you so much. But next we have Jemima Nasrin, who's going to be speaking about the culture of Kaap, voices of resistance in Bengali Muslim women. Jemima, whenever you're ready, and if you have any issues with sharing, let me know. Oh, before that, I will read out your bio. Jemima is currently registered as a PhD student in the Department of English, University of Calcutta. She has been selected as University Research Fellow since February of 2021. She has presented papers in national and international level seminars and participated in various workshops. Her papers have been published in various journals and edited books. Her areas of interest include cultural studies, gender studies, South Asian history, comparative literature, folk literature, etc. She has also worked as an editor at an audio podcast company. That's cool. And I'm gonna leave her email down below since she's included in her bio. whenever you're ready.
Yes. Am I audible properly? Okay. So today I will be talking about the culture from West Bengal, which is with which I will be showing the voices of resistance in Bengali Muslim women, basically. So I will read out it, my paper. So in West Bengal, the evolution of the cultural identity of Muslims has provided the vision of religious synthesis and cultural amalgamation between Islam and the local Bengali environment. As Islam's growth in Bengal progressed, it gradually took various forms and assimilated values, necessarily not always in conformity with the scriptures. The cultural fusion with the local milieu resulted in a popular Muslim folk culture and an inextricable blend of foreign and indigenous elements in rituals. Janana Mahafil, meaning the gathering of women, basically gets the marriage ceremony as the stage to bring forth the cultural heritage of Muslim wedding-centric songs. Now, these traditional Bengali Muslim wedding-centric songs, these are composed, written, and rendered solely by women. The songs are rich in culture and they represent the pulse of folk ways and society in the backdrop of a social ritual. In this exclusively female state, hidden from the male gaze, the Bengali Muslim women, they have not only expressed about their emotions and feelings through these songs, but they have also talked about broader socio-economic cultural scenarios. From patriarchy, dowry system, child marriage, to historical incidents, communal riots, urbanizations, varieties of issues as reflected in the mind of a woman confined within the boundaries of family and community form the contents of the song. The most interesting thing about the songs is the tradition of Kaap, which I think actually, which is a satirical musical drama and written and performed by women. And this was most popular during 1940s to 1990s in the villages of West Bengal. Now, in this culture of Kaap, family members and other villagers, primarily men, they are mimicked and are made fun of. As the women did not get any other stage, so the marriage ceremony was the stage for such performances. Kaap is most probably derived from the word al-Kaap, which is a folk culture where men generally get dressed as women and they act. So the women decided to perform their own way. So they in Kaap, they get dressed as men and perform. Basically, everyday life is the subject. This is the way they satirize the people through the performances, whom otherwise they hardly can say anything. This is the way they protest. So here's an attempt to understand how through this satirical comic performances known as Kaap, the Bengali Muslim women, they criticize the patriarchal society and its restrictions thrust upon them. We will also try to understand the theme and style and the contents of Kaap as well through this small span of time. So the word Kaap is most probably derived from the Sanskrit word kaputto, which means deceit. So they are deceiving as if they're the men. And it is basically a satirical musical drama, and it can be based on any kind of incident or any person or any family member. So just like the men play the role of women in Al-Kaap, in Kaap, the women dress themselves up as men and they perform the roles. Everyday life is ridiculed, specifically the hypocrisies of the society. They are brought into frame in this performances. Professor Shoktinath Jha, he wrote in his book, the book is named Musulman Samajer Biyer Geet. He talked about Kaap, and I will quote and translate him. Kaap is a kind of satirical farce. The women not only acted their own part, but also the women dressed themselves up as men and act their various activities. The village judgment, quarrels, voting system, family planning propagandas, village rogs, etc. are subject of this womanly acted Kaap. The women altogether make the dialogue instantly, and this is very interesting that the Kaap performances, they do not make themselves write themselves before, they just do that instantly on that very instant. So Kaap is a kind of satire to the entire patriarchal system. The main targets of this musical drama being the hypocrisies of patriarchy, and the language is very sharp and abusive. And there are sexual connotations as well, and they are very, very vivid. And for that reason, generally Kaap is performed at night when the children go to sleep. So as I was telling that this is a kind of stage where men are not allowed. So the women are there, but the children could also be there. So Kaap is performed at night when the children generally sleep. So Al-Kaap, from which it is derived, that is a theatrical derivative of the Jatra form. That is also rural folk theatre of Bengal. And this is essentially a musical theatre where ballads are sung along with dialogues and dance. So CAP and ALCAP, they can have a comparative discussion as well. They have always been a reference to a low culture. And both these traditions are the satire, and their satire is sharp against the lowliness, filthiness, and hypocrisies of society. They both aim at satirizing the higher class hypocrisies of hypocrites through their performances. But in ALCAP, the teenage boys, they dress up as women and they play the woman part. They are generally called chokras. On the other hand, as I said so many times now, the women, they dress up as men and they play the main part. So in both these dramas, there is no strict script. They can just improvise themselves while saying. The performers, they instantly can make up dialogues, and both these folk arts, they have been defamed for the abusive languages they use, and also for the apparent sexual connotations. So basically, this is CAP is basically the part of Janana Mahfil. So CAP was never written, was not in a written form, never. So hardly, because the women who used to perform on stage, they were not educated at all. Though there could be exceptions other than this. A few enthusiastic researchers, they have archived these performances into text, and mostly they are from a few villages of West Bengal. So I will just give an example of a small CAP so we can understand its essence. So the situation of this CAP is that there's a mismatched couple in a Muslim village, the husband being very old and the wife is very young. So now, as with age, they have differences in thoughts and they have usual fights as well. But the wife cannot divorce her husband, but ultimately with time, the husband dies. So now the dialogue begin between the dead husband, who is lying in a white cover, and the wife. So I will just try to translate like 3 lines where the wife says, "Oh, Abdullah's father." Generally, it's the ritual here. The woman calls their husbands as like their children's father. So, "Oh, Abdullah's father, why doesn't you make any way out for me?" So the dead husband, who is lying in his coffin, covered in white sheet, he says, "Oh, Abdullah's mother, work as maid in others' households." But Abdullah's mother is not happy with that. She is abusing him and saying that I cannot work as a maid. So then there will be a long conversation in singing mode, where the dead husband will ask the wife to indulge herself in different household works or other kind of activities, but she will reject the ideas one by one. Then the husband will angrily abuse the wife and ask her to get married again. And now the wife is very happy. At this point, she is overjoyed with happiness, and she will start singing in dancing mode as well. As this is a performance, they will be dancing also. So now she is very happy with this idea of remarriage, and the dialogue continues where the wife shows her happiness. And the Muslim women, generally, not only Muslim women, all the women in India, I guess, they did not have the opportunity to give divorce. And I'm also talking about the time 1940s to 1980s, 1970s, this time, excuse me. They did not have the opportunity to give divorce and remarry. Societal complications, religious, economical pressure, everything did not let her express her own feelings. Rather, she has to carry the burden of an unhappy marriage. So this CAP shows that how the wife becomes happy at the thought of marrying again. There is another one where the topic is basically early marriage, and it is criticized here. The Gitalis are basically the performers who perform in this performances as a like professional. Others are there also, the women, they also perform, but they are just professionals, the Gitalis. They have here quite persistently expressed their thoughts against the system of child marriage. In Bengal, child marriage was a normal trend even after the independence. In Muslim families, many times, if the economic condition of the bride was bad, or there were many sons and daughters in the family, the daughters would be married off. Sometimes the reason being that the daughters would get food to eat at least. So sometimes they were married off to old aged grooms or ill-suited grooms as well. In fact, this kind of scenario can be found now as well. Now, the following up is about a husband and an old husband about whom his wife makes fun. We will try to understand what they are trying to say. This is basically where the wife complains that she wants to make sweet dishes and spicy dishes for herself and her husband, but the husband is not capable of eating that because he is very old. So here, the old husband is being mocked in various ways, as he is too old. Sweet or spicy dishes doesn't suit him, and his health deteriorates. So, as very common in Kaap songs, there is also a sexual connotation through the imagery of a rod. Here, most probably the old man's inefficiency in sex is tried to be expressed. It becomes very important as sexual desire has always been associated to men only. Here, a Kitali, who is again a Bengali Muslim woman, is expressing implicitly about a woman's need of sexual pleasure through a song, which itself becomes a resistance against the common notions of feminine acceptance of sex. And all the performers who bring it to the stage are raising their voices, basically. Sex has always been a taboo in India, especially when it comes to female desires. Probably owing to the apparent nostalgia with Victorian England, female sexuality is considered a taboo in Indian society. The most problematic myth is that women can only be desired, not the desiring. This misconception roots from a patriarchal framework, which is based on the dynamics of power relations. Man is the provider and the woman is the receiver. So his desires and dominance would overpower that of a woman. In a patriarchal societies, it is important to keep the subject-object status of a man and a woman. When a woman blurs out her status as the object, expressing her desires, the society does everything to curb it, often taking the disguise of religious or moral ideologies. This is the reason the connotations were always made implicitly. Another thing is to notice here that this stage of Kaap is hidden from the male gaze, and the women did not curb each other for discussing openly about their desire through such performances. And I have gone through a few fieldwork as well, and I have seen they talk so openly about their sexual desires when they are only women. So, am I permitted to give another example? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Please go ahead.
yeah. So there is another example of a Kaap where I will just, yeah. So there is another song, and in this song, the husband tries to abuse the wife. Though he says that he will not beat her, but certainly he will hold the rod to teach her. Again, there's this connotation of rod through which the women are actually sexually aroused, but the husband wants to use it to teach the wife. So here the rod is symbolic for power control. So the husband is trying to exercise his power over the woman. And as stated earlier, the themes and stories for these Kaap performances often would be picked from everyday life. So this is the everyday life where a husband beats his woman, or at least he is saying that he will keep the rod in his hand to teach her. So that generally the woman would not do anything when their husbands try to exercise their control over them. But in the Kaap performances, they become what they actually want to do or how they actually want to protest, which they could not do in front of the husband. So I just hope this paper helps us understanding that Bengali Muslim women in the pre and post-independence era time, they have raised their voices against patriarchy, and these women are from villages basically, and they have voice for change and reform in the society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jemima. That was truly fascinating, and I'd like to chat more, but I think thank you firstly for giving the examples, because I think that was really helpful. And if there are any sort of links that we can find, YouTube videos of these performances.
Actually, I myself have collected a few videos, but I'm not allowed to share them. They have told me yes, they did not give me permission to share it, at least on online. Yeah, so yeah. I am not, yeah. But yeah, there are some performances on YouTube which are not Kaap basically, they are the wedding centric songs. I can share the link here in the chat box.
Please do, thank you, because I think that would really sort of help us understand, although that would in a way sort of be lifting the veil and looking into this private, safe space, which, women create for themselves. But nevertheless, I think you did a great job of sort of explaining and taking us through this. Thank you so much. Okay, next we have Lubna Ansari, who's going to be talking about love as resistance, women's identity negotiations, and Hindu-Muslim marriages. Lubna is a postgraduate research fellow at NYU Abu Dhabi. Lubna dissects notions of the personal and political with fervent curiosity. Utilizing their multidisciplinary skills and feminist ethnographic frameworks, the artist and researcher explores practices of love as resistance. The NYU Abu Dhabi graduate has immersed herself in the roles of both the insider and the outsider, which gives their work a refreshing angle that urges you to tap into your compassion. She is part of the assembly at Jameel Arts Center and is a postgraduate research fellow at NYU Abu Dhabi, like I mentioned. Take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction and co-organizing this. Also, thank you to the speakers for sharing their wisdom. I'll just be sharing my screen. I hope it. Okay. Amazing. Perfect. Okay. So just to begin, I'd like you to think about someone who has transformed the way that you conceive of love. So just take maybe 5 seconds thinking about that. So in this picture, this is me on the right-hand side, the small child, and that's my ma. We're just picking grass on a garden. But I kind of wanted to just start off with this picture because this research wouldn't exist without my ma. And I think I also want to acknowledge that what I present here today is partial and it's deeply relational. It comes out of my connection with my community, family, and lineage. So with that being said, I'll start off oops, wait 1 second. Okay, so where it began, this is my ma and papa on their wedding day. To me, my dad is known for his terrible sense of humor and for sort of lightening up any situation. In sociological terms, you may know him as a Muslim man. And my ma is known as this incredibly witty person who somehow always knows the right thing to say. And in sociological terms, a dominant caste Hindu woman. So as you might have guessed, they had a Hindu-Muslim marriage in quite a politically charged year, 94. And they had eloped with the support that is friendships, such an underrated life force. And as much as I would like to sit here and romanticize how they eloped, I won't do that. Instead, I'm going to sit here and share with you what comes out of observing them and growing with them, sort of note-taking all that is at stake in this marriage, and particularly sort of where and whom the burden falls on. So I think although marriages are deeply personal, they're also political, and a lot of existing scholarship on marriages and families show that these marriages and families are at the heart of nation building projects, particularly when we consider the role of women in nation building. So women often symbolize the honor of their social groups through their roles as transmitters of cultures, or simply known as just mothers, often depicted as even nation states. When we look at India and, for example, Mother India depicted as a Hindu goddess. And so nation states begin to be explored through metaphors of the family, in which these marital relationships allude to the public objectives of the nation. And any marital relationships that sort of deviate from these social norms around how to be in a marital relationship, they pose a huge threat to the nation because they pose a threat to the changing sociocultural fabric of the nation. And in this sense, intercaste and interfaith relationships pose a threat to India's national agenda and how they imagine the family structures to be. So women's bodies in these particular relationships end up being severely policed, controlled, and surveilled as to not step outside these imagined national values. And I think the love jihad discourse is incredibly relevant given the sort of momentum it's picked up in this past decade, where it's increased the vulnerability of Muslims in India who are repeatedly antagonized and villainized. It also strips women of the agency to choose their romantic partners. They're constantly infantilized by both politicians and their own family members for choosing their right to love. And also the love jihad discourse does erase a lot of important sort of dynamics that also unfold in interfaith relationships, such as the politics of caste, and also the erasure of Muslim women in interrelationships. So I began to ask this question, which was, how do women in Hindu-Muslim marriages negotiate their identity during and after marriage when so much is at stake and when entire systems of stratification are against their union? So I interviewed several couples who had been married for at least a decade, who were living in urban cities in India. And either partner, so one partner would have a Hindu upbringing, the other one a Muslim upbringing. But I also want to use these terms with caution because I think it's really easy to create a monolith out of these identities. But every single participant I spoke to had a very unique and individual relationship with either their Hindu or Muslim identity. And it also evolved over the time. It evolved over the sort of timeline of their marriage as well. And I explored this question through engaging in conversations where I would pose sort of semi-structured questions to the interviewees. And I think, so a lot of, it was incredible because I think the conversations are really free flow and it allowed for participants to narrativize their experiences really however they wanted to at length. The conversations would last for like sometimes hours on ends and in several sort of intervals, but the conversations were also consistently had while addressing the dynamics of gender, often without much prompting. And I think this is so important because a lot of this research can also be done without even centering the voices of who are most critical in the exploration of the study. So I ended up finding sort of three themes that kept emerging. Sorry, I also want to deviate from I ended up finding because I didn't find anything. I didn't discover anything new. This is relational knowledge. But I'm only going to stick to one sort of area only because of time constraints, but I'm happy to share my paper. I love having conversations about this. I'll add in my email address later. But the one that I'm going to share with you is the politics of marriage ceremonies. For a lot of interfaith couples, the validation and the celebration of their love was rooted in the traditional bonds of marriage. So that became a very important sort of milestone to get their relationship acknowledged by loved ones and in their own life, in their own selves. And the two most popular types of marriage ceremonies amongst all the participants were the Special Marriage Act, which does have a lot of structural issues, but I won't get into that here. I think it's just important to note that it wasn't always. I think if the couples were in communities that were safe and supportive, the Special Marriage Act was viable. Otherwise, the second most viable one was a marital ceremony that abided by what the husband's family wanted. And so that often involved a conversion from the wife's religious identity, upbringing, to the husband's. But I began to get more curious about what exactly this conversion meant to partners themselves, because as much as we hear data about like how many conversions happen, what does the process of this conversion actually look like? And I think this is also important given that conversion is wielded in a very particular way in the love jihad discourse for a very specific nation building agenda. I'm gonna just show you some snippets of the quotes that kept coming up, and this one stuck out to me. So the ceremony was just something that we did at the time, just to keep, the whole thing at an equilibrium. And throughout several interviews, these ceremonies were always described as, just to keep the family happy or just the equilibrium, just the general peace. And it's so important because I think one of the most successful ways for a lot of the couples to get married was to retain some level of harmony and balance in their own communities. So religious conversions almost just became a means to increase social acceptance and approval in their own little communities. It also became a way to just safely exist in these inherently discriminatory systems. And this snippet was also, it inspired the title of this section as well, where I'll just read it. For me, it was important to get married to him, not the way of getting married to him. I had no problem with the ceremony. It's about reaching the destination and doesn't matter the journey, shortcut or long cut. And I think in the larger picture of how the institution of marriage is set up, conversions became a very small bargain to love and exist in these stratified systems. And I think the current or the dominant discourses often displaying conversion as incredibly black or white and a sort of solidified term, but it's not. It's an incredibly nuanced process with people having many sort of differing relationships with it. But the most important thing is that this dance between deviating from and conforming to patriarchal structures just became one of the safest ways to exist in these systems. And women also actively exercise their agency to choose conversion. And this disrupts the findings that women are in need of saving. They're not. They're creatively utilizing the patriarchal social system to get what they want, which is a love that precedes boundaries. And so just a few reflections that I had, along with the social approval and assimilation and the tools that were used, such as conversion or religious marriage ceremonies, there was also another type of negotiation that women faced, which was an estrangement and alienation often from their own families. And this was unlike what often their male counterparts or husbands had to go through, where husbands often needed to just negotiate one form of relationship, which was often with their own families, where women were stuck between these two paradigms, trying to negotiate themselves between both. And this also resulted in tremendous amount of emotional labor and an emotional toll that I don't think is spoken about much, but also it's not unveiled. How do we unveil it with academic words and lingo sometimes? And I think the narratives between both Muslim and Hindu women demonstrated that there is this shared reality in terms of this dual identity negotiation. Both groups of women spoke about these experiences in just strikingly similar details. And it also implies just how, what a deeper look we need to take into the gender identity in intermarriages themselves. But also just in deviating from social norms around marriage. Women of intermarriages also disrupt this casteist vision of a nation, and their subversion is not as visibly loud as it might be in public spheres, but they silently disrupt these sociocultural aspirations of both families and nations through their fight to just have their love validated socially. And this has led to some ongoing research currently. I'm a research fellow at NYU Abu Dhabi, as has been mentioned. And what I'm doing is trying to figure out right now how these negotiations that seemingly happen on this